The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by our Dutch friend and semi-regular guest, Rico Brouwer, who was previously involved in Pirate Party politics and is currently host of the Potkaars podcast. How are you doing, Rico?
Excellent. Given the circumstances, but I'm in good health. Happy to talk to a friend who's moved around the world, Roji.
Yes. All right, that's good news.
I have a little gimmick here. So Potkaars, that's the name of my channel. It's pot with candle. Now, translate pot however you want. It's a flower pot for me, but it's pot with candle. So conversations of hope. So that's Potkaars. Welcome.
All right. Conversations of hope. I like that. We've, on Geopolitics and Empire, we've recently been discussing a lot COVID 1984 and the lockdowns, and we've had a good roster of guests covering the subject. I personally make no apology for my viewpoint that this pandemic is not a pandemic, and or it's being used for absolutely nefarious totalitarian purposes by powers that are acting, at a global level, pulling the strings of nations and pushing them towards some kind of nasty agenda. But recently, there have been anti-lockdown protests all over the planet. There was one recently in Mexico City, in Australia, some other parts of the world, but also in Europe. There was the one in Berlin, and I'm not sure if you attended that, but I'd like to get your take on what's happening with the COVID situation, the lockdowns in Europe, as well as in the Netherlands, where you're located.
All right. So, there were actually two big demonstrations in Berlin, and those were the biggest ones on the European continent. First one being August 1st, second one being last week. And first one had, we don't know how many people showed up. According to Dutch television, like 20,000. According to the organization there, 1.3 million. So that was the first demonstration, August 1st. And then the second one, like a week or 2 weeks ago, I don't know the date by heart, drew more. So let's say 1.5 million, 1.8 million people in the streets of Berlin. Now, the second one was cool because they had arranged for buses, like stagecoaches, to drive into Berlin from all through Europe, from the Netherlands, from all other countries. So things are happening in Germany. Now, the lockdown measures in Germany are more strict than they are in the Netherlands, like with the face masks and those things. So that's but also in Berlin, they may have some more historic perspective, right? With the Berlin Wall, that's still in recent memory. Maybe that contributes to them being more going out to demonstrations. But I wasn't there. No. A friend of mine who lives in Spain, who visits the Netherlands once a year, was here. So I decided, now I have to see this guy. And then we were there talking to each other, looking at each other. He said, I should have gone to Berlin. I said, dude, I'm here with you because you're here. We could have gone together. So no, I wasn't there. There's demonstrations in the Netherlands as well. And they are small, like 5,000 people, which is fairly small for a country of 17 million. People. First demonstration we had against the corona measures was June 21st from recollection, and it was forbidden. Now in the Netherlands we have pretty solid rules that allow you to demonstrate. That's a constitutional right. You can protest whatever you like. There's no grounds for banning a demonstration unless, I don't know, the sky falls down or earthquakes happen or another. There's no grounds, but they have been blocking demonstrations in the Netherlands for this topic, even though a week before Black Lives Matter is allowed to go through. But this was blocked. People showed up regardless, and that first protest that went through, even though it was blocked, that was beaten down pretty hard for Dutch standards. So that was, we haven't seen that in a long time. And maybe that contributes to people not really wanting to go to one of those protests again. So what I'm going to do there, get beaten up again?
What do you mean? How bad did that turn out? Like people physically beaten or arrested, or what happened?
Okay, so there a few things happened there. One is people went. So in the Netherlands we have this tradition, right? Our government is situated in The Hague, just like the International Peace Court and the OPCW. Those things are in The Hague. That's where our government is as well. There's a big grassy field in The Hague. That's where we go. That's our tradition. If we go demonstrate against our state, we go to that field. It's called the Mali field. So people show up there and they're intimidated and threatened off the field until there's too many of them. And then the mayor says, well, you're allowed to protest for half an hour. And then, but after the half an hour, all of a sudden the hooligans showed. Do you know the word hooligan? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, like the delinquents, hooligans.
Delinquents, yeah. In Dutch that would mean, we mean the football supporters. That mean mischief. That would be hooligans. So then the hooligans showed up. Well, the hooligans, in the words of our Dutch prime minister, showed up. And what he actually said was doorgesnoven hooligans, which is Dutch, which is not really a Dutch word. He invented it. I tried to translate it for you. It would be the coked up thugs on drugs hooligans. So you get the idea. So they showed up. They start singing, and a bunch of them lure some of the demonstrators off the field. Then one of those presumed coked up thugs on drugs hooligans arrests somebody else, drags him over the ground, and takes him to one of the police vans. Those weren't hooligans. Those were undercover cops. They lured some of the demonstrators off the field. Now there's two groups of demonstrators, the people staying behind, the people marching off the field, doing their demonstration march or whatever. So one of the protesters was dragged off, and that's when people say, "Hey, don't take that guy," and then the tear gas and clubs and stuff and arrests took place. Another action that they had planned was, if democracy's died, let's put flowers in front of our city hall. That's a nice friendly protest. So people brought their flowers, wanted to go to city hall, and were banned and blocked and intimidated as well. So you're not allowed to demonstrate. I'm just taking my flowers. So that's new for us, that these things happen. Right.
Wow, it sounds like a wake-up call, and that's a classic strategy with the police all across the world. It's a false flag tactic, infiltration, and creating a violent pretext, right, for the police to crack down and deviate the movement. What other aspects of the lockdowns can you comment on, whether in Netherlands or Europe? You mentioned the media as well.
Yeah, so I'll talk Netherlands first. I don't know how you look at the Netherlands. So for me, but maybe I'm chauvinistic here, we have a pretty old democracy and a sturdy constitution and a nice separation of powers. So if you talk democracy, the Dutch should set an example. Is that how you would look at it, maybe?
Like historically, yes, I guess traditionally.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when the corona pandemic was declared, and I'm choosing my words carefully, I agree with the COVID 1984 that you coined back in, I don't know, early this year. So when a pandemic was declared, the Dutch went into lockdown as well. And at that time, like in March, we didn't know what was coming. So we closed our schools, closed our restaurants, and that's just like the rest of the Western world. And I was okay with that at that time. But those lockdown measures were not done under emergency law. We have an emergency law. So if there's a case of emergency, state of emergency, like big forest fire or chemical disaster or whatever, you declare a state of emergency, and then you can do whatever you want. And then Parliament is in charge of loosening that state of emergency again. So that's your democratic process right there. Now with coronavirus, we didn't do the state of emergency. We delegated the measures to our mayors, who in the Netherlands are not elected. So unelected mayors harmonized their approach, but there was no state of emergency. Now, the bandwidth that our mayors have is not that big. I mean, it's an unelected mayor. He can do whatever he needs to do, but he cannot violate our constitution. But that's what he did. That's what our mayors did. They imposed rules, all of them, that violate our constitution, like block demonstrations or like mandate the 1.5 meter measures, like you're not allowed to touch each other, kiss each other, have sex, or touch each other, or go shopping with more than 2 people, and all those things. So those measures were unconstitutional. And you can get away with that for a week or 2 weeks, but you can't get away with that for months. And a group of people stood up to that and started filing lawsuits, like fast-track lawsuits against the state and against our CDC, against our National Health Service kind of organization, the RIVM it's called. And they're and against the state, and they're losing everyone. But then taking the state to court and making these things explicit and saying, well, these are the measures you've taken. You're not allowed to take them by the mayors. They're breaking the Constitution regardless. So, judge, please put a stop to this. And then through all kinds of constructs, or the judge just refuses to look at the Constitution and says, well, I think it is kind of an emergency. And so we see that our juridical system is just as flawed as the political system that imposed these regulations through the mayors. Now, we have relaxed our measures somewhat, and I am complaining. I mean, I'm very upset and very angry at our Dutch government and at the mayors. But at the same time, in Spain, you would get beaten up if you were smoking outside your hotel. And in Germany, you have to wear the face mask all over the place. So the measures in the Netherlands are not as strict as they are in other places. But still, we are not allowed, we're not supposed to be closer to each other than 1.5 meters. We're not allowed to shake hands.
What happens if you do that in public? Is there someone like watching you? I mean, if you walk with a friend arm in arm, what's going to happen?
So when this first started, our Minister of Justice did a marketing initiative on his bicycle. Well, us being the Dutch, he took his bicycle. And this was like early summer. So through a big known park, the Vondelpark, where people were picnicking, he would be on his bike, the Minister of Justice, and stopping at people and say, well, you're not really following the rules. So you really should be following the rules, right? So the cameras were on that. So that was nice and friendly marketing approach. Now that was the first implementation of our corona measures, but then the fines started. So after that, if you were close together, you would get a 390 euro fine. If there's 10 of you, you would get 10 times that amount. And so that's quite a significant amount of money. It's not nowhere near as bad as in Spain or Germany or other countries, but still, that's a big fine. Now, that Minister of Justice got married the other day, and well, like in most other countries, you will have some tabloid photographers sitting behind the bushes trying to snatch pictures. So we learned after the wedding that guy that was imposing fines, and there was day after day, week after week, telling people to keep their social distance, to follow the rules, to not spread the virus, to not get people sick. He was getting married, hugging everybody, hugging his mother-in-law, hugging his grandchildren, whatever, on the other arm, and that went through the day. So that's a blatant show of arrogance. Like, I'm the minister. I can get away with anything. It's like a movie, right? It's like the Three Musketeers movie where the elites spit on the people.
Well, I mean, I think beyond just that, it shows that they're not even taking it seriously, which adds again fuel to that fire of the idea that this is not a pandemic. I mean, the elites, the people in control, are not taking it seriously. So they're not afraid. So there's something going on there.
Either that or he really hates his mother-in-law. No, they're not taking it seriously. We know they don't take it seriously. There's pictures of our lower house, of our parliament, where the people, their chairs, well, they're not 1.5 meters apart. So then now they're keeping like chairs, and then one empty and then another one filled and then one empty, so they can keep their 1.5 meters. But if you see through the door opening, they're just chatting, standing close together, being social, like we're supposed to. We're social animals, right? So off camera, when they think they're off camera, they're just being their social normal self. So it's all a big act. It's a big play and it's out in the open and everybody sees that. And also everybody does that. So when I was talking to you last time, when was that? March 6th, I made a note. Just before the lockdown, we were talking. And you were talking about your like credit card thingy that
Yeah,
you
in
had
Kazakhstan, yeah.
You were only allowed to go out a couple of times a month, and just between you and your spouse, and only for grocery shopping. So in the Netherlands, we did that for a while. If the two of you went grocery shopping, one would be stopped at the entrance, and the other one would be allowed to go in with their cleaned card. We're not doing anything of that anymore. Nobody believes that stuff anymore. We're just being our regular selves, shopping and whatever, not observing those idiotic rules. Nobody is sick here, Vodji. And the word, so you coined COVID-1984, and you might have actually been first to do that, and the way I saw it anyway. But there's other terms now. We have the plandemic, right? And we have the case-demic. So this annoys me more than anything. There are cases. And what's a case? Well, that's a PCR tested person. So you get this test, and some part of this alleged virus was found from whatever inside your body, in your nose or in your throat. That is not an indication of you being sick or you being infectious, and it might even be a false positive. And the person inventing those tests also said you can't use this for a clinical diagnosis. But all over the world, we're using those tests, and the result is, well, there's cases, but on the news here in the Netherlands, it's portrayed as patients or infected or infectious people. So me being a journalist, I called the Dutch CDC and said, well, about those tests, I mean, this is how it's on the television. This is what it is. So am I misunderstanding? Explain this test to me. And he said, no. It's I mean, you know what we're testing, so it's not that you're infected or infectious. So how does it make it to the TV where my prime minister is saying that there's patients then? So I don't know. Ask the prime minister. So here we have the Dutch Fauci in a way, or the Dutch CDC or whatever, saying one thing, and my Dutch Minister of Health and Prime Minister saying something totally different on TV, and our Dutch BBC, the NOS, the Dutch Broadcasting Corporation, going along presenting the lies of our political system. So it's out in the open here, Vodji. But most people are not watching my podcast or yours. They're still watching their television.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar around the world, but I mean, there is a group of people, as you say, just starting not to well, I think there's a big divide. There's still people who believe the official narrative, and they won't remove themselves from it because I think they've invested so much into it, and they don't want to look stupid and admit that they've been had, that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes, as they say. But I know in Croatia, I had some relatives attend last weekend the protest in Zagreb in Croatia against the lockdowns, and as well the media, everywhere the media falsely portrays all of the protests and the protesters. Is there any final thought you have for us on the Corona bin Laden, COVID-1984, the lockdowns, before we get an update on what's happening with the Julian Assange case?
Yeah, well, maybe an example. So I have two kids. So I don't believe kids age 2 are supposed to wear mouth masks just yet. And in school in the Netherlands, the kids also don't have to wear the masks. Some regulations still apply though. And if you have a cold, if you sneeze a lot, you're supposed to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks. Now, a foreign exchange student who came back from Mallorca, I believe, anyway, from abroad, where there were supposed to be more cases like those tested people, she was flown back and she had to mandatory quarantine in a closed down facility with a closed locked door. That's uncommon for the Netherlands. We don't have that. I mean, you heard that from Wuhan in China, where they soldered the doors closed. But this student was mandatory closed in, by official Dutch instances. And it took her 6 days to ask, well, what do I have to do to leave? Can I? Well, no, you're here voluntarily. So the rules are still officially, it's voluntarily, but they impose so much pressure on you that it takes you 6 days to actually dare ask the question how you may leave. But she was locked. The door was locked, and only when she herself pressured was she allowed to leave, and she was never sick. Now I was texted by my kid, who's 14 now, and he said, "Well, I sneeze a lot in class. Do I need to go home?" I don't know. What do I tell the kid? So my answer was, well, if you're uncomfortable being in class, then you go home. If you feel sick, then you go home. But if you think you have a cold and you want to follow this class, then you stay. But I think I broke rules, and I think he could be in trouble, because if you sneeze, you're supposed to leave. In the United States, students are tested. They're drafted, right? There's place, Ohio, I think. Oh, I'm doing this for recollection. Students are drafted and say, well, you're getting a test. And if you refuse, you're getting your mandatory isolation.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's happening everywhere. So I think recently in university, people left the campus, or they just for questioning the narrative. Students are now being kicked out for a week. And I think recently some university students broke the rules, and they were expelled from the university, and the $30,000 they paid in tuition, the university kept. So,
the other example, and then we go to Assange. I have a daughter also. She's 11 now, almost 11, and she has this presentation that she needs to do in class. Right, all the kids have to do one presentation, and they pick a topic. And she decided, I'm going to pick the coronavirus and the measures as a topic. And she's in my camp. She's critical. And I'm going, oh, what am I going to tell her? What's the teacher going to think of a kid being critical of the official narrative? I think I'll tell you in the next interview. So she's as stubborn as I am. So what do you want to know about the Assange case, Roger?
Yeah, because you've interviewed previously one of the first NSA whistleblowers, Thomas Drake, and you've known Alfred de Zayas, who was my professor as well, who's met personally with Assange, and you're out there in Europe. And today, September 7th, Monday, the Assange Wikileaks case has resumed. I haven't been following it too closely, but apparently he's been charged with 17 counts of espionage. And I was reading antiwar.com, where I think yesterday published, and this is one of the scary parts of the case, and its conclusion, if it ever comes, is, quote, if Assange, an Australian citizen, is extradited to the US and prosecuted, it will be the first time a journalist is tried under the 1917 Espionage Act, and it will set a grave precedent for press freedom in the US and around the world, end quote. So maybe if you can just give us an update, what's happening with Assange in the case?
Yes, here's the update. So Assange has been in isolation, locked up in an Ecuadorian embassy, and then arrested, taken from the embassy in London, and then arrested, put in Belmarsh prison, and he's been there over a year. And his extradition trial, the real trial dates, I mean, there were procedural hearings, so let's skip those, but there was a real trial proceeding in February. That took a week. I was there in London. And while I was there from my hotel room, I interviewed all kinds of people, including Thomas Drake that you just, well, no, it was John Kiriakou. Anyway, the CIA whistleblower. You get my point. Back then, the charges were mostly Espionage Act. And that is odd. But that's the world we live in. So an Australian journalist or publisher, at the least, is sought by United States because he exposed war crimes, and United Kingdom is playing along. Sweden is playing along. Ecuador is playing along. But back in February, the pretense still won that the juridical system in United Kingdom might still exist. But well, the public jury is still out on that. So that was February, and then today it resumed. Now in court, so I was not there. if I wanted to go, I was planning to go there. I was planning to go to London, be a journalist, be a protester again. But if I did that, I had to go through 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine. And if you enter the country, unless you enter in a small harbor and nobody sees you, if you enter through official channels, you have to file where you stay, and they may check where you stay. And if you break quarantine, then you're in trouble. So I was not prepared to suffer the 2 weeks, and I was not prepared to do it illegally. So I'm not in London. I'm at home. Some journalists are there. Some other journalists managed to subscribe to an online session, webcast by the court. Now, in my assumption, Rogi, the court proceedings are supposed to be public. They're open to the public. You can visit them as the public. That's the way the legal system works. But with the corona measures, they're not public. So in the Netherlands, this is a good thing of the Netherlands. They're streaming our big court proceedings. They're streamed out to the audience, just to YouTube, really, basically. It's a different channel, but you get the idea. Everybody gets to see them. Not so much in the United Kingdom today. Some journalists were allowed to follow the stream, but some international observers and organizations like Amnesty International were denied at last moment, like this morning. I mean, they were registered, they were sitting, they were ready, and they were denied the access to the stream. Kristen Hrafnsson, who is now the editor-in-chief of Wikileaks since Assange is in prison, he was out in the street doing a speech. It's recorded, you can see that. Just like John Shipton, Assange is dead, John Pilger, the journalist, and some other people. Kristen Hrafnsson was out in the street also doing a presentation, and then he went to court to be there. He was denied access. So there's a clip of the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks being not allowed in the court building, in the courtroom, being not allowed to follow the court proceedings. Now, I talked to him in February. I was behind the fence. I mean, I'm a journalist without a card, without a press ID, and he comes out of the courtroom. He was kicked out in February. And then there was a public uproar, and then he was let in. So that was February, but now he didn't even get in. So that's the court proceedings today. The audio of the journalists that managed to get in or that were on the stream was bad, so they didn't hear everything. And the connection of the recording failed altogether when the first real witness was presenting this case. So these court proceedings are not public. We're not allowed to see them. There are no international observers. There's a few journalists, and I managed to find 2 of them who were typing on Twitter, giving us a report. So what I'm telling you is those reports. And the biggest thing that happened today is that the original extradition case that the United States made was dropped and then was replaced by a new one. Assange was re-arrested today in court because the old one was dropped, so there's no arrest. And then there was a new one, so he was re-arrested. So, well, the documents underlying that new arrest, they were available for a couple of weeks. Assange never got to see them. And the lawyers and Assange never got to discuss them. And judge asks the defense attorney, so did you manage to discuss this with Assange? And he said, well, we had 2 short telephone conversations, but that didn't really help. So they didn't have time to prepare at all for this new indictment. What's new in the new indictment is that it appears not to be so much about the Espionage Act articles. But what happened today in court, and I'm just paraphrasing because I don't know, I wasn't there. I'm reading people who are typing stuff on Twitter. So the way I understand it is that Assange's defense really don't know what to defend against anymore. We had the old case with the Espionage Act that is properly prepared, I think, under the circumstances. And then we have the Americans making a new case with new indictments, going, well, yeah, he was hacking computers and doing all other kinds of stuff. And the defense go, well, maybe we should read this first and prepare.
Essentially, it's like a kangaroo court, basically, and the death of democracy. I mean, they can do whatever they want now, and toss you in the cage, and that's it.
Yes. So these two topics that we've just discussed, and we're going to the end of this conversation, I think. My Minister of Justice blatantly not following his own rules, for which he imposes criminal penalties you get a criminal record if you're too close to somebody and you get fined. And he has his wedding, and I'm all for his wedding and hugging people. He's doing the right thing, but he has to stop that crazy law and that difference in justice, because him not being under the law and all of us are. Same thing is happening with Assange. He doesn't stand a chance. There is no rule of law in the United Kingdom.
Well, I think we've seen in large parts of the world, effectively, in many countries. Well, thanks to Corona, everywhere now, basically.
That's the cool thing. So I met you before this, but I'm meeting so many cool people doing so many cool stuff now. And there's so much. This channel, Potkaars, like Conversations of Hope, this is hopeful. It's exploded in watchers and exposure and people contributing and talking to each other. So all this information, the more they defraud the system, the more the information comes out. The only thing is, we might lose people like Assange before we get momentum. That's what's gonna keep me up tonight.
I'm also afraid they're going to cut the line, big tech, slicing and dicing, chopping, YouTube. And so I think a lot of us are trying to migrate to the alternative channels, but, they might even do something there through internet service providers and things like that, worst case scenario. But to finish here, so we've covered the lockdowns and what's happening with Assange. Just to get your main website or initiatives that you want to let us know about, what are the best websites to find you on?
So I'm running my own Potkaars podcast, and that would be kind of what you're doing with the geopolitics, only my angle would be I need people that are activists, that try to make the world better. I don't need per se the geopolitical information. I'll go to your interviews for that. But if you're activist, so this is local. If you see this thing, that's Potkaars, Potkaars.nl. Half of the interviews are English spoken, half is Dutch. And the other initiative is that I want to plug here is manystream.media. And if you are organizing a demonstration, if you're in Melbourne, if you're in Hong Kong, if you're in Texas, if you're in Mexico, if you're protesting if you're with the Assange trial, if you're out in the street outside the court building, just volunteer your stream, your phone. If you're putting that up in the air and you're recording what's actually happening there, volunteer that link to manystream.media so everybody in the world gets to see them. It doesn't have to go find them. It can be on Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, library.tv, BitChute, PeerTube, whatever. If you can stream to it, link it, and I'm collecting that on the manystream.media. Let that be the alternative to mainstream media.
All right. Yeah, let's work on that together. I know you've started that up recently, Mainstream Media. And again, I'm going to urge listeners to check out Rico's Potkaars podcast. I'll put the links in there. It's a shame I can only understand half of the podcast because the one half is in English and the other half is in Dutch. And you also, I think, work with the other popular Dutch podcast channel, Café Welschmerz, which has a lot of good guests on there. But again, I can't listen to them because some are most are in Dutch. So again, check out the podcast there, and we'll be talking again soon to get news from you about what's happening in Europe on even other subjects. So thank you again, Rico.
You're welcome, buddy.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast and interview. I would like to remind you that our website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list that goes out each weekend with the latest podcast and a long collection of important news headlines. It's good to sign up for the newsletter in case we experience censorship and deplatforming. You can help the Geopolitics and Empire podcast by subscribing to and interacting with all of our channels such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Gab, Minds, and Steemit. You can also help us by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Spreaker, and so on. Finally, if you value our work and our mission and would like to see us continue interviewing experts from across the political spectrum, please consider leaving a one-time donation via PayPal or Bitcoin, or becoming a regular monthly supporter on our Patreon. All the links can be found on geopoliticsandempire.com. Thanks for listening.